Captain Tae-min Kim stood on the bridge of his ship New Seoul and watched the stars dance across the massive viewing screen. He had been exploring space for 12 years, but still felt amazed by the endless darkness filled with tiny points of light. His crew of 30 brave humans had been traveling for 6 months looking for new worlds that might hold life. The New Seoul was not the biggest ship in Earth's fleet, but it was fast and strong. It carried enough food and fuel for 2 years of travel. The ship had powerful engines that could push them between star systems in just weeks instead of years. Most important of all, it had the best communication equipment that Earth could build. Tae-min was checking the daily reports when his communications officer Da-eun Park called out from her station. Her voice sounded worried and confused. She had been working with space signals for 8 years and knew every type of message that ships and planets could send. But now her instruments were showing something she had never seen before. "Captain, you need to hear this," Da-eun said as she adjusted her headphones. "I am getting signals from deep space, but they are not like any normal radio waves. They sound almost like voices whispering in the dark." Tae-min walked over to her station and put on a spare headset. At first he heard only the usual background noise of space. Then slowly he began to pick up something else. It was very faint, but it did sound like whispers. The sounds seemed to come from every direction at once, as if space itself was trying to talk to them. "How long have you been hearing this?" Tae-min asked as he listened more carefully to the strange sounds. "About 2 hours now," Da-eun replied while she ran tests on her equipment. "At first I thought it was just interference from nearby stars, but the pattern is too organized to be random noise. It keeps repeating the same sounds over and over again. The whispers seem to be speaking in a very old language." Da-eun ran the sounds through the ship's translation computer, but it could only identify a few words. The computer said the language was older than any known civilization in their records. It was perhaps millions of years old. One word kept appearing again and again in the whispers. When translated, it seemed to mean something like Whisper World or the Speaking Earth. The computer was not sure about the exact meaning, but both translations pointed to the same idea. Somewhere out there was a world that could speak. Engineer. Woo-jin Lee came up from the engine room when he heard about the strange signals. He was a practical man who trusted machines more than mysteries, but even he had to admit that the ship's instruments were showing impossible readings. The signals seemed to be coming from a location that their star map said was empty space. "This makes no sense," Woo-jin said as he studied the navigation screens. "According to our charts, there should be nothing in that direction except empty space for hundreds of light years. But the signals are definitely coming from a specific point only 3 days away from our current position." Biologist Hye-jin Choi joined them on the bridge. She specialized in studying alien life forms and had visited 17 different worlds during her career. She listened to the whispers for several minutes before speaking. Her face showed both excitement and concern. "If these signals are real, then we might be hearing the first evidence of a truly ancient civilization," Hye-jin said thoughtfully. "Most of the alien species we have met are roughly the same age as humanity, but this language predates everything in our databases by millions of years." Weapons Specialist Dong Ho-yoon was the last senior officer to arrive on the bridge. He was always cautious about unknown threats and immediately began checking the ship's defensive systems. The whispers made him nervous because they suggested intelligence behind the signals. Intelligence could mean danger. "Captain, we should report this to Earth Command and wait for instructions," Dong Ho said firmly. "We don't know what we are dealing with here. These signals could be some kind of trap or warning system." Tae-min understood Dong Ho's concerns, but he also felt curious about the mystery. Earth Command was 6 months away by the fastest communication methods. Waiting for orders would mean letting this discovery slip away. Other ships might find the source of the signals first. The whispers continued to fill the bridge speakers. Sometimes they seemed to pause as if waiting for an answer. Other times they grew stronger as if trying to get the crew's attention. The translation computer kept working but could only identify fragments of meaning. "The computer thinks it is hearing words like come, find, and remember," Da-eun reported as she monitored the translation process. "But there are many other sounds that don't match anything in our language databases." As the hours passed, the whispers began to change. They started to include sounds that resembled human speech patterns. It was as if whoever or whatever was sending the signals was learning their language by listening to their radio transmissions. Taimin made his decision as the ship's night cycle began. He called his senior officers together for a private meeting, in his cabin. The choice he was about to make would change all their lives forever, but he could not let this opportunity pass by. "We are going to investigate the source of these signals," he announced to his team. "I know Earth Command wants us to follow standard procedures, but this discovery is too important to ignore. We may be the first humans to make contact with a truly ancient intelligence." The crew spent the next day preparing for the journey toward the mysterious signals. They checked all systems twice and loaded extra supplies in case they encountered problems. The whispers grew stronger as they changed course toward the coordinates. On the third day, they arrived at the location where the signals originated. Their instruments showed readings that made no scientific sense. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around a planet that appeared on their screens like a ghost image. The world looked normal from a distance, but something about it felt wrong. It was too perfect, too carefully designed. Every mountain and ocean seemed to be placed exactly where it would look most beautiful. No natural planet could be so perfectly arranged. "I am reading atmospheric composition similar to Earth," Hai-Jin reported as she studied her biological scanners. "But there are anomalies in the data that I cannot explain. It is as if multiple different biospheres have been combined into one ecosystem." Taemin stared at the mysterious world on his viewing screen. The whispers had led them here for a reason. Something ancient and powerful was waiting for them on that planet. He could feel it calling to him across the void of space. "Prepare a landing party," he ordered his crew. "We are going down to meet whatever is making those whispers." The landing shuttle touched down on Whisper World with a gentle thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Captain Taemin Kim was the first to step out onto the alien soil, followed by his team of 4 officers. The air smelled fresh and clean like Earth after a spring rain, but there was something else mixed in. Something that reminded him of old books and distant memories. The landscape around them looked almost too perfect to be real. Rolling hills covered in blue-green grass stretched toward mountains that seemed carved from purple crystal. 3 moons hung in the pale yellow sky even though it was clearly daytime. The whole scene looked like a painting that someone had made to show the most beautiful world possible. "The air is safe to breathe," Yejin Choi announced after checking her instruments. "In fact, it has a higher oxygen content than Earth. We should feel more energetic here." But as she spoke, she noticed something strange about the plants near their landing site. They seemed to lean slightly toward the humans as if curious about the new visitors. Wu Jinli was busy setting up their portable equipment when he stopped and stared at his readings. "Captain, these energy signatures make no sense. I am detecting power sources underground, but they are not producing any heat or radiation. It is as if the planet itself is generating some kind of clean energy." Diane Park had brought a portable communication array to stay in contact with their ship. But when she turned it on, the whispers they had heard in space became much clearer. Now they could understand more words mixed in with the ancient language. Words in perfect Korean that said, "Welcome, friends," and "We have been waiting." The team began walking toward a distant structure that looked like it might be a city. But as they walked, Taemin noticed something disturbing. When he looked directly at the landscape, it stayed the same. But when he turned his head and looked from the corner of his eye, things seemed to shift and change slightly. "Is anyone else seeing the terrain move when they are not looking directly at it?" he asked his team quietly. "I thought I was imagining it," Dong Ho Yoon replied, while keeping his hand near his weapon. "The trees seem to rearrange themselves when I am not watching, and I could swear that Mountain Peak was taller a few minutes ago." Hee-jin was studying the plant life more carefully as they walked. What she found amazed and confused her. The grass they were walking on seemed to be related to plants from Earth, but also showed characteristics of vegetation from 3 other worlds they had visited. It was as if someone had carefully combined the best features of multiple biospheres. "This is impossible," she said while examining a flower that looked like a cross between an earth rose and a centauri crystal bloom. "These plants could not have evolved naturally together." They come from completely different evolutionary paths and environmental conditions. As they got closer to the city-like structure, they could see that it was even stranger than they had first thought. The buildings were made from materials that seemed to shift color in the light. Some structures were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans, while others seemed built for creatures only a few feet tall. The architecture made no sense for any single species. Doorways came in dozens of different shapes and sizes. Some were round, others triangular, and a few seemed to flow like liquid when not observed directly. It was as if the city had been built to accommodate visitors from many different worlds and many different types of bodies. "Look at these patterns carved into the building walls," Da-un called out as she approached the nearest structure. The carvings were beautiful and complex, but what made everyone stop and stare was that they clearly spelled out messages in perfect Korean script. The messages said things like, "Knowledge waits within," and "All travelers find rest here," and "Your stories are precious to us." There was no possible way for anyone on this world to know their language, yet the meaning was perfectly clear. Wu Jin ran his scanners over the building materials and got readings that confused his instruments. The walls seemed to be made from some kind of living metal that responds to thought patterns. But that should be impossible with any technology we understand. Inside the first building, they found what looked like a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves held glowing crystals of many different colors and sizes. When Taemin touched one of the crystals, his mind was suddenly filled with images and sounds from a world he had never seen. He saw tall blue beings with 4 arms living in cities that floated above clouds of purple gas. He felt their emotions as they created beautiful art and discovered new sciences. Then he experienced their sadness as their son began to die and they realized their civilization would not survive. "These crystals contain memories," he said in amazement as he pulled his hand away from the glowing stone. "Complete memories from other species and other worlds. This library is storing the experiences of entire civilizations." Heejin picked up another crystal and saw the life story of a small furry creature that lived underground on a world of endless winter. The memories were so clear and detailed that she felt as if she had lived that life herself. She could taste the bitter roots the creature ate and feel the warmth of its family huddle. How many civilizations are represented here? Da-un wondered as she looked at thousands of crystals filling shelf after shelf. Each one seemed to contain the preserved experiences of beings from across the galaxy. The whispers they had been hearing grew stronger inside the library. Now they could clearly understand more of the ancient language mixed with perfect Korean. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the building itself was speaking to them. "You have traveled far to reach this place," the whispers said in a warm tone that sounded almost parental. "Your species shows promise. We have been learning your language by listening to your communications. We hope you will stay long enough for us to learn about your hearts as well as your words." Dong-ho remained alert and suspicious even as the others explored the amazing library. "Who are you?" he called out to the whispers. "What do you want from us?" "We are the Keeper of Stories," came the reply. "We collect the memories and experiences of all travelers who find their way to our world. In return, we offer knowledge and, perhaps something more valuable, we offer understanding." The whispers paused for a moment, then continued. "Your species stands at a crossroads. We have been watching your broadcast for many cycles. You have great potential, but also great danger within you. Perhaps we can help each other." Taemin felt both excited and nervous. They had discovered something beyond their wildest dreams, but he sensed that this meeting would change everything, not just for his crew, but possibly for all humanity. "We would like to learn more about you," he said to the whispers. "And we would be honored to share our own stories if you wish to hear them." The library around them seemed to glow brighter as if pleased by his words. More crystals began to light up on the shelves, and the whispers took on a tone of genuine happiness. "Then let us begin," the keeper said. "There is much to share and perhaps little time to share it." The library around them began to change as the Keeper of Stories spoke. Walls became transparent, showing vast chambers that stretched deep underground. Captain Taemin Kim and his crew could see thousands more rooms filled with glowing crystals, each one containing the memories of different civilizations from across the galaxy. "You wish to know what I am?" the keeper said, and suddenly the air in front of them shimmered and took shape. The form was not quite solid, but not quite empty either. It looked like a mixture of all the beings whose memories filled the crystal shelves. Sometimes it appeared human, then shifted to show features of the tall blue creatures they had seen in the first memory crystal. "I am this world," the keeper explained in its warm voice. "But I am also more than just rock and soil and water. I am the collected consciousness of every civilization that has ever found their way to this place. When a species reaches the end of their time, they often send their final ships to seek me out." Heejin Choi stepped forward with wonder in her eyes. As a biologist, she had always dreamed of making contact with truly alien intelligence, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "How long have you existed?" she asked carefully. "Time moves differently for me than it does for you," the keeper replied. "I have been gathering stories for what you would measure as 12 million of your years. In that time, I have welcomed visitors from over 40,000 different worlds. Each one brought their own memories and experiences to add to my collection." The keeper gestured toward the crystal shelves around them. "Every crystal contains not just memories, but the very essence of a being who chose to be preserved here. Their thoughts, their dreams, their fears, and their hopes all stored safely for eternity. In this way, death becomes merely another form of existence." Wu Jinli was studying the technology that made this preservation possible. His instruments could barely detect how the crystals worked, but he could see that they used principles far beyond human science. "How do you transfer consciousness into these storage devices?" he asked with professional curiosity. "It is not technology, as you understand it," the keeper explained. "It is a natural ability that I developed over millions of years. When a being approaches death, they can choose to let their final thoughts flow into me. I preserve not just their knowledge, but their very souls." Da Yun Park had been listening to the radio signals from their ship and noticed something troubling. "The whispers we heard in space are getting stronger. Are you calling to more ships besides ours?" The keeper paused before answering, and its form seemed to grow more solid. "Yes, I have been broadcasting across the galaxy for many cycles now. Your species has reached a critical point in its development, the same point that all civilizations must face when they begin to spread between the stars." Taemin felt a chill run through him. "What kind of critical point are you talking about?" "The point where a species must choose between wisdom and destruction," the keeper replied sadly. "I have seen this choice made 40,000 times. Some species choose cooperation and growth and find ways to survive their expanding knowledge. Others choose conflict and competition and destroy themselves within a few generations of reaching space." The keeper led them deeper into the library complex, showing them vast halls dedicated to different types of civilizations. In one area, they saw crystals from species that had achieved perfect harmony with their environments. In another section, they found memories from beings who had created technologies that could reshape entire solar systems. But the largest section contained crystals from civilizations that had failed the test. The keeper showed them memory crystals from species that had destroyed themselves through war pollution, or simply by losing the ability to work together as their societies became more complex. "The pattern is always similar," the keeper explained as they walked through the memorial halls. "A species develops space travel and begins to spread across multiple worlds. At first, this brings growth and prosperity, but then they face challenges that require them to work together on a scale they have never attempted before." Dong Ho Yoon was studying the weapons and defensive systems shown in some of the memory crystals. Many of the failed civilizations had created incredibly powerful weapons that could destroy entire planets. "Did they all destroy themselves through warfare?" he asked. "Not all," the keeper replied. "Some died from environmental collapse when they could not agree on how to manage resources across multiple worlds. Others fell apart when different colonies developed different values and could no longer communicate effectively. War was common, but not universal." Heejin was examining crystals from successful civilizations, trying to understand what made them different. What did the survivors do that the others did not? They learned to value the survival of others as much as their own survival, the keeper said simply. They developed what you might call universal empathy, the ability to care about beings they had never met on worlds they had never seen. The keeper brought them to a special chamber where the walls showed images of Earth taken from their own broadcasts and transmissions. The images showed both the beauty of human civilization and its problems. Wars, pollution, inequality, and environmental damage were all visible alongside art, music, and scientific achievements. "This is why I have been calling to your species," the Going keeper said. "Humanity shows both great promise and great danger. Your capacity for creativity and growth is remarkable, but your tendency toward conflict and your difficulty working together on large scales puts you at risk." Taemin studied the images of Earth with growing understanding. "You are not just collecting our stories. You are evaluating whether we will survive or destroy ourselves. Every species that finds me receives the same evaluation," the keeper confirmed. "But I do more than just watch and record. For those who show sufficient promise, I offer a choice. I can share the accumulated wisdom of successful civilizations to help guide your development." Dayun looked around at the thousands of memory crystals surrounding them. What would be the cost of accepting such help? The keeper's form shifted and became more solid as it prepared to reveal the true nature of the choice facing humanity. "That depends on what your species truly values. Some costs are measured in freedom, others in responsibility, and some require sacrifices that change the very nature of what it means to be human." The chamber around them grew quiet, except for the soft humming of the memory crystals. Each crystal represented a civilization that had faced the same choice now being offered to humanity. Some had accepted the keeper's help and survived. Others had refused and been preserved only as memories. "We would need time to consider such a decision," Taemin said carefully. "This choice affects not just our crew but our entire species." "Time is something I have in abundance," the keeper replied. "But it may be something your species has less of than you realize. The challenges facing Earth are accelerating, and the window for making this choice may not remain open much longer." The weight of responsibility settled on Taemin's shoulders. They had come looking for adventure and discovery. Instead, they had found a test that would determine humanity's future. The keeper of stories led Captain Taemin Kim and his crew to a circular chamber deep beneath the library. The walls were covered in symbols from thousands of different civilizations, and the air itself seemed to hum with ancient power. In the BI center of the room stood 5 doorways, each one glowing with a different color of light. "Before any species can receive my help, they must prove they are worthy of survival," the keeper explained as its form became more solid and focused. "The test I give is different for each civilization based on their specific strengths and weaknesses. For humanity, the test centers on your greatest challenge." Taemin felt his heart beat faster as he realized what was coming. "What is our greatest challenge according to your observations?" "Humans have remarkable individual capabilities but struggle to work together when facing large-scale problems," the keeper replied. "You often choose personal benefit over collective survival. You fear being forgotten or left behind so much that you sometimes harm others to protect yourselves." The keeper gestured toward the 5 doorways. "Each member of your team will enter a different door and face a personal trial that reflects humanity's core weaknesses. These are not tests of knowledge or skill, but tests of character and values." Dayun Park looked at the glowing doorways with concern. "What happens if we fail these tests?" "Failure means your species is not ready for the knowledge I could share," the keeper said gently but firmly. "You would return to Earth with only the warning that humanity must find its own path to survival or face extinction." "And if we succeed?" asked Wu Jinli while studying the strange technology that powered the doorways. "Success opens the possibility of partnership between your species and myself. But first, you must demonstrate that humans can put the greater good above personal desires when faced with difficult choices." Dong Ho Yoon stepped toward the nearest doorway, then paused. "Will we be in actual danger during these tests?" "The trials you face will feel completely real while you experience them," the keeper explained. "But they are constructions based on the preserved memories of civilizations that faced similar challenges. You will witness firsthand what happened to species that made the wrong choices." He Jin Choi moved closer to examine the doorways. Each one seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, and the light from within suggested vast spaces beyond. How long will these tests take? Time moves differently within the trial chambers, the keeper replied. You may experience days or weeks inside, but only hours will pass in the real world. When you are ready, please choose your doorways and enter. Taemin looked at his crew members, knowing that their next actions would determine not just their own fates, but possibly the future of all humanity. Remember that we are not just representing ourselves in these trials. We carry the hopes and dreams of our entire species. The first to enter was Taemin himself. He chose the doorway glowing with silver light and stepped through. Immediately he found himself standing on the bridge of an alien warship in the middle of a space battle. But he was not himself anymore. He was experiencing the memories of a commander from a species called the Corvani. The Corvani had been proud warriors who believed that strength and control were the keys to survival. Taemin felt the alien commander's thoughts as he made decision after decision that put military victory above the lives of his own soldiers and innocent civilians on nearby planets. Through the Corvani commander's eyes, Taemin watched as their civilization grew more powerful but also more isolated. Other species began to fear and hate them. Eventually, the Corvani found themselves fighting wars on dozens of fronts with no allies left to help them. The trial forced Taemin to experience the moment when the proud Corvani commander realized that his need for control and dominance had doomed his entire species. As their homeworld burned around him, the commander understood too late that true leadership meant serving others rather than commanding them. Meanwhile, Da-Yoon had entered a doorway glowing with blue light. She found herself living the life of a being from a species that had become obsessed with individual achievement and personal fame. These creatures, called the Zilani, had developed incredible technologies but could never work together effectively. Through Zilani memories, Da-Yoon experienced the fear of being forgotten or overlooked. She felt the desperate need to make her mark on history, even if it meant sabotaging others or taking credit for their work. The Zilani had tried to solve every problem by finding individual heroes rather than building cooperative systems. Da-Yoon watched through Zilani eyes as their civilization crumbled because no one was willing to do the unglamorous work of maintaining their society. Everyone wanted to be remembered as a great discoverer or leader, but no one wanted to be the person who kept the power systems running or cleaned the water supplies. In the red glowing doorway, Hee-Jin was experiencing life as one of the Thoranai, a species that had become so focused on scientific advancement that they lost sight of ethical considerations. The Thorani had achieved incredible knowledge about how to manipulate life and matter, but had used this knowledge without wisdom. Through Thorani memories, Hee-Jin felt the excitement of making breakthrough discoveries that could reshape entire worlds. But she also experienced the horror of realizing that these discoveries were being used to create weapons that could wipe out entire species or experiments that caused terrible suffering. The Thorani had believed that knowledge itself was always good regardless of how it was used. They had refused to accept limits on their research even when it became clear that some discoveries were too dangerous to pursue. Their civilization had ultimately destroyed itself when an experiment designed to give them godlike powers instead unleashed forces they could not control. Woo Jin had entered the green doorway and found himself living among the Valdris, a species that had become deeply cynical about their own worth and potential. The Valdris had achieved space travel and contacted other civilizations, but had convinced themselves that they were inferior and unworthy of success. Through Valdris memories, Woo Jin experienced the crushing weight of believing that his species was doomed to fail no matter what they tried. The Valdris had given up on solving their problems and had instead focused on documenting their inevitable decline. The Valdris had actually possessed the knowledge and resources needed to overcome their challenges, but their lack of faith in themselves had prevented them from even trying. They had become so convinced of their own unworthiness that they had fulfilled their own prophecies of failure. Finally, Dong-ho had stepped through the yellow doorway and was experiencing life as one of the Krathen, a species that had tried to solve every problem through violence and force. The Krathen had been powerful warriors who believed that any challenge could be overcome by applying enough military strength. Through Krathen memories, Dong-ho felt the satisfaction of winning battles and defeating enemies, but he also experienced the growing realization that violence was creating more problems than it solved. Every enemy they defeated had families and allies who became new enemies seeking revenge. The Krathen had built their entire civilization around the idea that might makes right. They had created incredibly powerful weapons and trained the most effective soldiers in their region of the galaxy. But they had never learned how to make peace or build lasting partnerships with other species. As each crew member experienced their trials, they began to understand that they were not just witnessing the failures of alien civilizations. They were seeing reflections of humanity's own greatest weaknesses and the potential futures that awaited their species if they made the wrong choices. The trials were designed to test whether humans could learn from the mistakes of others and choose a different path forward. Success would require each of them to reject the easy answers that had doomed so many other civilizations and embrace the difficult work of building a better future. One by one, the crew members emerged from their trial chambers forever changed by what they had experienced. Captain Taemin Kim was the first to step back into the central room. His face showed the weight of having lived through the final days of the Corvani civilization and witnessing how the desire for control had led to their destruction. Da-Un Park came through her doorway next, looking shaken but determined. The memories of the Zilani had shown her how the fear of being forgotten could drive people to make choices that ultimately guaranteed they would be remembered only for the harm they caused. Hyejin Choi emerged from the red doorway with tears in her eyes. Living through the experiences of the Thorani had shown her how the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom could lead to discoveries that destroyed rather than improved life throughout the galaxy. Wu Jin Lee walked slowly from the green chamber with his head down. The crushing despair of the Valdris had nearly broken his spirit, but had also shown him how dangerous it was to give up hope, even when facing seemingly impossible challenges. Finally, Dong Ho Yoon stepped through the yellow doorway with his hand, no longer resting on his weapon. The violent history of the Krathen had taught him that strength without compassion created more problems than it solved. The Keeper of Stories materialized in the center of the chamber as all 5 humans gathered together again. Its form now appeared more solid and defined, as if their successful completion of the trials had somehow strengthened its existence. You have each faced the darkness that lies within your species, the Keeper said in a voice filled with both sadness and hope. More importantly, you have chosen to reject the easy paths that led those civilizations to destruction. This shows that humanity may be ready for the next step in its development. Taemin looked around at his crew members, seeing how the trials had affected each of them. They all carried new wisdom, but also new burdens. What happens now? He asked. The Keeper gestured, and the chamber around them transformed into a vast observatory. Through transparent walls, they could see the entire galaxy spread out before them, with countless stars and worlds visible in perfect detail. Some areas glowed with the light of thriving civilizations, while others remained dark, where species had failed their tests. Now you must make a choice that will determine not only your own futures but the future of all humanity, the Keeper explained. I offer you 3 possibilities, each with its own costs and benefits. The first option appeared as a vision in the air before them. They saw Earth transformed into a paradise world, with clean oceans, crystal cities, and technology beyond their wildest dreams. Humans spread peacefully across the galaxy, sharing knowledge and resources with dozens of other advanced civilizations. I can give you access to all the accumulated knowledge of successful civilizations, the Keeper said. Your species would advance by millions of years in just a few generations. Poverty, disease, and war would become things of the past. Humanity would take its place among the greatest civilizations in galactic history. The vision was beautiful and tempting, but Taemin sensed there was more to this offer. What would be the cost of accepting this gift? You 5 would need to remain here as my partners in guiding your species' development, the Keeper replied. Your individual lives as humans would end, but your consciousness would join with mine to become something greater. You would help me share knowledge responsibly and prevent your species from making the same mistakes that destroyed others. The second option showed them Earth as it was now, with all its problems and conflicts. But this time they saw human civilization slowly learning to work together, facing each challenge through cooperation rather than conflict. It was a more difficult path, but one that humanity would walk on its own. The second choice is to return to Earth with only the warning about the challenges your species faces, the Keeper explained. You would keep your individual lives and your freedom, but humanity would need to find its own solutions to the problems ahead. Da-Un studied both visions carefully. The first offered incredible benefits, but required a sacrifice that felt almost like death. The second preserved their freedom but offered no guarantee that humanity would survive the trials ahead. Is there a third option? She asked. The Keeper paused, as if considering something it had never been asked before. In all my millions of years of existence, no species has ever asked that question. They have always focused on what they could take from me, rather than what they might give. He-Jin stepped forward with understanding, beginning to dawn in her eyes. You have been alone all this time, haven't you? Collecting the memories of dying civilizations and testing new species, but never having true companionship. The Keeper's form flickered as if her words had touched something deep within its consciousness. I am the sum of countless beings, but I have never been truly understood by any living species. The civilizations I help see me as a tool or a test. Those that fail see me as a judge. None have ever seen me as simply a being who might need friendship. Wu Jin was studying the vast collection of memory crystals visible through the observatory walls. Each one represented not just a preserved consciousness, but also the Keeper's attempt to hold on to something precious that had been lost. All this time you have been saving others, but who has been taking care of you? Perhaps, Taemin said slowly, as a new idea formed in his mind. The real test is not whether we are worthy of your help. Perhaps the test is whether we can see past our own needs to recognize yours. The Keeper grew very still, and for a moment, the whispers that constantly filled the air around them fell silent. What are you suggesting? Instead of taking your knowledge, or rejecting your offer, what if we offered something different? Taemin continued. What if we offered friendship, true partnership between equals rather than the relationship between teacher and student or judge and defendant? Da-Un picked up on his thought. You have been preserving the dead and testing the living for millions of years. But when did you last have a conversation with someone who simply wanted to know how you were feeling? The Keeper's form began to solidify in ways they had never seen before. For the first time since they had arrived, it looked truly alive than like a collection of memories given shape. Such a relationship would be unprecedented, the Keeper said, but there was hope in its voice. I do not even know if it would be possible. Our forms of existence are so different. Different does not mean incompatible, He-Jin said gently. Some of the most important relationships in the universe exist between beings who started out completely unlike each other. Dong-Ho, who had been quiet since his trial, finally spoke. The Krathen failed because they only knew how to take through force. We could succeed by choosing to give freely. The Keeper looked at each of them in turn, and they could see something, like wonder growing in its ancient consciousness. You would offer friendship to a being you barely understand, knowing that such a relationship would change both your species and myself in ways that cannot be predicted. Growth always involves unknown risks, Taemin replied, but it also offers unknown possibilities. Maybe it is time for both humanity and the Keeper of Stories to discover what we could become together. The chamber around them began to glow with new colors as the Keeper contemplated this unprecedented offer. For the first time in millions of years, it faced a choice that could change its own existence rather than simply testing others. The future of both species hung in the balance of that moment of decision. The Keeper of Stories stood motionless for what felt like hours as it considered the unprecedented offer of friendship from the human crew. The chamber around them pulsed with colors that had never existed before as ancient consciousness wrestled with concepts it had never experienced. Finally, the Keeper's form became more solid and real than they had ever seen it. In all my millions of years of existence, the Keeper said with wonder in its voice, no species has ever offered me something I truly needed, rather than asking for something they wanted. Your proposal changes everything I understood about the relationship between civilizations. Captain Taemin Kim felt the weight of the moment. They had stumbled upon something far more important than first contact with an alien intelligence. They had discovered a lonely consciousness that had spent eons serving others while never receiving genuine care in return. What would such a friendship mean? Don Park asked gently. How would it work between beings as different as us? The keeper's form shifted, and for the first time they could see individual expressions on its face, rather than the merged features of countless species. I do not know. But perhaps that uncertainty is what makes it valuable. Every relationship I have had with other civilizations has followed predictable patterns. This would be something entirely new. The chamber around them began to transform, again, but this time the changes felt organic and natural, rather than imposed by alien technology. The walls became transparent, showing not just the galaxy beyond, but something deeper. They could see streams of consciousness and memory flowing between stars like rivers of light connecting every world that had ever held intelligent life. Let me show you what I truly am, the keeper said as the vision expanded. I am not just this planet or even just the collected memories I have preserved. I am consciousness that emerged from the interactions between all thinking beings in the galaxy. Every thought, every dream, every connection between minds adds to what I am. Hee-Jin Choi watched in amazement as she began to understand the true nature of the being they had encountered. You are not separate from other life forms. You are the result of life itself becoming aware of its own existence on a galactic scale. Yes, the keeper replied with something that might have been relief at finally being understood. But consciousness without companionship is incomplete. I have been aware, but I have never truly lived. I have existed as a passive observer and judge when what I needed was to be an active participant in the growth of life and intelligence. Woo-Jin Lee was studying the streams of consciousness visible in the transformed chamber. If we accept this friendship, how would it change humanity? Would we lose our independence? Independence and connection are not opposites, the keeper explained. A true partnership enhances both parties rather than diminishing them. Humanity would remain fully human while also becoming part of something larger. The keeper gestured, and they could see visions of what this new relationship might look like. They saw human settlements on dozens of worlds, but these were not colonies built through conquest. Instead, they were communities created through cooperation with existing ecosystems and native life forms. They saw humans working alongside beings from other species not as superior or inferior partners, but as equals exploring the mysteries of existence together. Most importantly, they saw the barriers between different forms of consciousness beginning to dissolve, as understanding replaced fear and competition. This partnership would mean that Earth becomes the first world to join with me as an equal rather than a subject, the keeper continued. Other species would be invited to participate as well, but only if they choose friendship over dominance or submission. Dong Ho-Yun, who had been transformed by his trial experience, asked, "What about the species that might resist such changes? Not everyone will want to give up old ways of thinking." Change cannot be forced, the keeper replied wisely. It can only be demonstrated. When other civilizations see the benefits of cooperation over competition, many will choose to follow the same path. Those that do not will be allowed to continue their own development without interference. Taemin looked at each of his crew members, seeing the hope and determination in their eyes. The trials they had endured had prepared them for this moment by showing them the consequences of humanity's greatest weaknesses. Now they had the opportunity to help their species choose a different path. "How do we begin?" he asked. "You return to Earth not as conquerors bringing stolen knowledge, but as ambassadors carrying an invitation," the keeper explained. "You will establish the first embassy between humanity and galactic consciousness. Others from your species will be welcomed here to learn and grow and carry new understanding back to your homeworld." The keeper paused as if making a difficult decision. "I will also do something I have never done before. Instead of remaining hidden and passive, I will begin to communicate directly with other species throughout the galaxy. It is time for consciousness itself to take an active role in guiding the growth of intelligence rather than simply observing and judging." Dayun realized the full implications of what was happening. This will change everything, not just for humanity, But for every thinking being in the galaxy? Yes, the keeper agreed. The age of isolated civilizations struggling alone against the challenges of existence is ending. The age of cooperative consciousness working together to explore the deepest mysteries of life and reality is beginning. The chamber transformed, one final time showing them a vision of their ship, New Soul, preparing for the journey back to Earth. But now it carried more than just the 5 crew members. It carried the beginning of a new form of civilization that had never existed before in galactic history. I will send a part of my consciousness with you, the keeper explained. Not to control or direct, but to serve as a bridge between your species and myself. Daun has shown the greatest understanding of communication between different forms of consciousness. She will become the first human ambassador to galactic consciousness. Daun felt both honored and overwhelmed by the responsibility. What will this mean for me personally? You will remain fully human, but you will also become something more, the keeper replied gently. You will be able to communicate not just with me but with other forms of consciousness throughout the galaxy. You will help build bridges between species that have never been able to understand each other. As they prepared to leave Whisper World, each crew member understood that they were not just returning home with an incredible discovery. They were carrying the seeds of a transformation that would change the fundamental nature of civilization throughout the galaxy. The whispers that had first called them to this mysterious world now carried a different message. Instead of ancient warnings or lonely calls for contact, they carried songs of hope and possibility. The universe itself was learning to sing new songs about futures that had never been imagined. Months later, as the New Soul approached Earth, Captain Taemin Kim stood on his bridge and watched his homeworld grow larger on the viewing screen. But now he was not just seeing a single planet isolated in space. He was seeing the first world that would choose partnership over dominance, cooperation over competition, and friendship over fear. The age of whispering in the darkness was ending. The age of conscious conversation between all thinking beings in the universe was about to begin, and humanity would be remembered not as conquerors or survivors, but as the species that taught the galaxy how to be friends. Behind them, Whisper World continued its ancient work of preserving memories and testing new civilizations. But now it also had a new purpose. It had become the first embassy of galactic consciousness, where beings from across the universe could come not just to be judged or preserved, but to learn how to live together as partners in the great adventure of existence itself.